Hey, what's going on everyone? Today we're going to be taking a look at the Ecoflow Delta 2 Max. And this is hands down one of my favorite portable power stations, and Ecoflow in general has just been very good overall from all the power stations that I've tested. And one thing that I absolutely love about this, as well as the other Ecoflow River 2 Pro that I've reviewed, is the fact that it outputs 120 volts. A lot of other power stations that I reviewed only put out between 109 to 112 volts, and 120 is closer to your household output power, so it's going to be a lot better for your electronics. And the second thing I absolutely love about this unit is the fact that it's so adjustable in the app. Hands down, it's the best app that I've used with any power station. There's so much controllability in there. You control your input rate, you can control how far it charges, how far it discharges. There's energy management apps that can override AC charging and just charge with solar at certain points. And I'll get into that a little bit more later in the video. I'll show you an example of that. But hands down, there's just so much that you can do with this thing. It's awesome. Now this is a 2048 watt hour lithium iron phosphate battery, which is good for up to 3,000 charge cycles, and it will still maintain 80% of its capacity. But if you need more than 2048 watt hours, you can get 2 additional expansion batteries and plug them right into the 2 side ports here for up to 6 kilowatts of power. So 6,000 watts of backup power if you do have those 2 additional batteries. And at 2,400 watts of output, this thing can easily replace a 2,000 watt gas generator. It's quieter, cleaner, less maintenance. You don't have any oil changes. The only thing you have to do is worry about charging this thing up from solar. And for a 2,048 watt hour battery and only weighing 50 pounds, it's still very portable, yet very capable to power those larger 2,400 watt loads. Now 2,400 watts is 20 amps, so it will power all your essential needs around your house if your power goes down and you don't have any grid power. The main things that I'm concerned about powering if my power goes out would be my furnace, to keep me with heat, which I have a gas furnace, actually 2 of them. I have a mini split, which this will not run that because it does not output 240 volts. It does only output 120, but it will run both my gas furnaces, charge my cell phones just fine in a power outage, power all my lights so that I could see getting around. But the main #1 thing that I really need powered is my furnace for heat, which I'm sure this will handle. So real quick, we'll talk about the specs and features of this thing, and then we're gonna get right into the testing. So the first thing I really like is there is a switch here for when you're charging with AC. Whatever you have this slow charge set to in the app, whenever you flick this switch, it will charge at that rate. And why that's important is if you're trying to charge with a generator, like I've done in some of my past videos with that small 800 watt inverter generator that I have, you could set this thing for say 600 watts. And then when you flick that switch to slow, it will charge at 600 watts and it will not throw the breaker on the generator. Or you could select fast mode and it will charge up to 1,800 watts, but it's adjustable in different increments. Over here you have 2 XT60 ports, which will charge from 11 to 60 volts and up to 15 amp max or 500 watts apiece per port. And what's nice about that is if you have multiple different solar panels, you can plug one into each port and use both of them. You don't have to worry about paralleling or trying to put together in series solar panels that don't match, because sometimes that's not good to do. Or you could charge from your car DC output port and get like 120 some watts in on one port and then charge from solar on the other. So that's pretty awesome that they do have 2 ports there. Would have been nice to see one a little bit higher than the 60 volt input limit, but still 1,000 watts of solar this thing will take in. That's pretty amazing. You have 6 120 volt AC outlets here on the back, and then your 12 volt DC car socket here, and 2 5521 ports that are 3 amp max output. And they do give you a 5521 to a 5521 cable here if you need it. And also with the unit, you get your cable to plug into the wall to charge up, and you get a car adapter here with an XT60 output port here, so you can charge this thing up from your car socket. On the front of the unit here, you have 2 12 watt USB-A ports, 2 18 watt USB-A ports, and 2 100 watt USB-C ports. Now these are not input ports, these are only USB-C outputs, so you cannot charge through them. And also on the front of the unit, you have a really nice display that shows you how many hours you have remaining. It shows you the input wattage, the output wattage, the percentage of the battery that's left, and a bunch of other information depending on things that you have turned on or off. Now, one thing I do want to note is that you cannot turn these AC ports on from the front of the unit or the DC 12 volt socket. So if you have this thing packed into somewhere and you can't see or get to the back, you will have to use the app to turn those on. That might be a negative for somebody, but for me, it didn't really matter because the app works really well. And if after watching this video, if you feel like one of these are right for you, I'll leave a link down in the description, as well as any coupon codes that Ecoflow might provide me for you to save a few dollars. So if you're interested, make sure you check out that link. Now, as a disclaimer, Ecoflow did send this to me for testing and review, but you're gonna see for yourself in these tests here that this thing really performs well. Let's get into it. All right, so now one test that I like to do is an AC discharge test to see how much phantom power draw the AC outlets use and the inverter uses while the unit is on, not powering anything. So I've had the AC outlets or the inverter on for just over 8 hours, and it started at 100% down to 94, so 6% in 8 hours. So you can expect about an 18% discharge for the AC outlets to be on for about a 24-hour period. All right, so now in this test, we're gonna plug a small sump pump in and pump out this pond I got here because it's gonna get really cold here on Monday, like 17 degrees Monday and Tuesday. So we're gonna see how this thing does with a sump pump. I'm sure it'll do really well. And it's pumping 514 watts. Oh, that's nothing. And let's see how well it's pumping. Oh, nice. So I wanted to get this pumped out before this all freezes and then water gets down in there, freezes and busts the pipes. I actually need to cover this up. I just haven't got around to it yet. And this is a 1/6 horsepower submersible utility pump. And it made quick work of that and only used 1% of power. That's awesome. Off to the next test. All right, so now we're gonna try it with the Draffy Tools pressure washer. This is an 1800 watt pressure washer, 20-some hundred PSI. But we're gonna see if the Ecoflow will run it. And I did a full review on this. If you guys are interested, you can check it out, but I love this thing. I'm gonna turn it on. We're gonna show you how many watts of output. It should be around 1800. All right, gonna pull it out here and see if it will keep up. And actually it was over 1800 watts. So now I'm gonna hose off underneath here because I'm pulling it in the garage to do some rust proofing on it. So I'm just trying to hose some salt off. Let's see if it'll keep up. So far, so good. And for doing this, these angle tips are awesome. This didn't come with the pressure washer. I bought that separately. But it's keeping up no problem. All right, so now in this next test, what I did was I ran the USB ports and the DC with no load for just over 12 hours, about 12 hours and 20 minutes, started at 89% and only lost 3% for the DC ports all being on, both the front and the rear. But very good overall for over 12 hours of use to only use 3%. Now what we're gonna do is put this thing through a test and see if it can power both this coffee pot and this electric kettle, and it should be pulling over 2000 watts, and we'll see how this handles that. Turn the AC on. We'll start with the coffee pot here. We'll see what kind of wattage it pulls. 889 watts. Now we're gonna go ahead and fire up the kettle and see what it does. Should be just over 2000 combined here. 2452 watts. So we're gonna let this go. Let this brew until the coffee's done. And what is nice, while this is under full load, pulling over 2400 watts, it's still outputting 120 volts, which is awesome. And it also has a pure sine wave. Very, very nice at 60 hertz. Still pulling 2422 watts, brewing the coffee and heating up the water. So far, so good. So the kettle is done, the coffee is not. So it dropped to 889 watts, but perfect. Ran all these perfectly at just over 2400 watts, never threw any error. So that's amazing. Now this unit here is capable of running up to 2400 watts continuously at 120 volts, or you could change it into X boost mode in the app here. And what that does is allow this unit to run up to 3,400 watts, but it does start to limit the voltage after you get past 2,400 watts. So I already showed you it was running at 120 volts whenever it was powering 2,422 watts. Now that I got X boost mode on, let me show you how that works. So I'm gonna go ahead and fire up these heat guns here. It's gonna get really loud, you might not be able to hear me, but keep an eye on the output. Once it gets over 2,400 watts, you'll see the voltage start to drop. Now I wouldn't recommend this for sensitive electronics, but for things like heaters, blow dryers, coffee pots, things like that, it would work just perfect. And I absolutely love that you can turn it on or off in the app. 1,430 watts, still at 120 volts. Gonna go ahead and turn this other one on. 1,830 watts. Bump it up some more, almost 2,000. Still at 120 volts. I'm gonna really crank it up here. 2.38 kilowatts, so 2,380 watts, and it dropped to 113 volts. We'll come around here on the front. 2383, but it's actually pulling a lot more wattage than that. It lowered the voltage so that it could run these. For example, there, I'll turn X boost off, turn it back on to the same settings, and you'll see it'll draw a lot more than 2,400 watts. But it'll stay at 120 volts. 120 volts, we're pulling 2,700 watts almost. And it stays at 120 volts now that I turned X boost off. 2,668 watts. And I'm sure if I left this run, it will probably throw an error code for an overpower. But that's amazing that the voltage is still at 120 volts, pulling this much wattage out of this unit with X boost mode off. Let's just let it go here and see how long it will actually run 2,600 watts. Check the voltage out. Holding steady at 120 volts. And it just tripped. You can see there overload, but it did run it for, I don't know, at least 30 seconds or so at 2,600 watts, which is pretty crazy. And we'll go ahead and turn the outlets back on, and no problem. Everything reset, working just fine. And one thing I do want to note is the fans are really quiet in this unit. Even pulling 2,700 watts, it was kind of hard to hear because of these, but even after shutting those down, the fans are really quiet in here. See if you can hear with the mic up close. But that's just after running that overload test. That is awesome performance in my opinion. All right, so now I have two 400 watt panels outside coming into each input on the back of the generator here, and I'm getting 660 watts. I only have 1 meter for one panel on here, and it's getting 9.12 amps, 335 watts from one panel, and the other 300 and some watts are coming from the other panel, going right into this double port. Now these ports are rated for 11 to 60 volts and 15 amps each. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put both of those in parallel into one input and see if we can max out that 15 amps onto one of those inputs. But to get 660 watts into here from two of those panels right now, that's awesome. And I'm gonna show you what I absolutely love about Ecoflow and their app. There's just so much adjustability. But first, let me show you that there is pass-through charging. You can see I'm able to use the AC while it is charging from solar. You could use the DC, you could use all the outlets. Basically, the whole unit can be used while it's either solar charging or charging from the grid. Now, I do also have this plugged into the grid, but it is not charging from the grid right now. It's only charging from solar because in the app here, in energy management, I have it set for backup reserve, set to 70%. So what that means is anything below 70%, it will not only charge from solar, but will also charge from AC. And when it reaches 70%, it will only charge from solar from 70 to 100%. And that is adjustable. You can adjust that to anything you want. So the unit's at 77%. You'll see if I bump this up to 80%, it will start using power from the grid until that reaches 80%, and then it will cut the grid power and then continue to charge with just solar. So that is amazing, and that's one thing I got to give to Ecoflow is all the settings that you can change in the app, and the app just works really well, pairs good to the unit. Now you can see here, I'm getting over 2,000 watts of input now because I was getting 600 and some on solar and the rest on AC there from that wall outlet. It looks like it might have started to drop a little bit and probably going to drop once it hits a higher charge rate there. But that is what's amazing. So much adjustability and flexibility with the way that you can charge this. You could set this up to charge from a generator, and you could charge with a small generator while you're charging from solar. And there's a switch on the back that you can change, and whatever you have it set to in the app for the charge rate, you can see right here I have the AC charging speed set to 1800 watts. If I flick that switch in the back, I have the AC charging speed in the app set to 500 watts. You can adjust that in the app whenever it's set to slow charge. You can adjust it from 100 watts all the way up to 1800 watts. So now it's only pulling in 500 watts from the grid, and it's pulling in the rest through solar. You can see here 650 watts through solar, 512 through the grid. And as soon as that hits 80%, which it did right there, that should start to drop to 0, and it should continue to charge just off of solar. Well, actually it says 79.5% in the app, so probably once this reaches 80% here, the app is probably more accurate. It can go in points of a percent, whereas the unit can only go in 1% increments. So as soon as this reaches 80% here, it should cut the input from the grid. There it goes, 80%. So you can see it cut off the AC charging, and now it is only charging 650 watts through my two 400 watt solar panels. But that flexibility to be able to set different parameters for your charging and discharging is awesome. And now I have both panels ran into parallel. Let's plug them into one of the ports here and see if we can max out that 15 amps. And they do have a 500 watt input limit. You can see it's almost reaching that limit at 12.43 amps, 39.55 volts. So I'm almost at that 500 watt limit. So not quite as efficient as if I just went directly into the back of the unit on each port. I was getting 650 watts versus the 500 watts here that it's almost getting 491. So you could see I would be better off just going into each one of those ports. Well, what's awesome about that it has two ports, is if you have two mismatched panels, as long as you're under that 60 volt limit, you could plug one panel into each port and use them, because typically you don't really want to parallel two panels together that aren't the same or similar in power. But that's awesome if you have two different panels. They could be different wattages, different voltages, and you could plug one into each one of those ports and be able to charge through this thing flawlessly. Or you can run panels up to 60 volts in one of the ports and then run the other port to your vehicle while you're driving, and you could get 12 volts into the other port. So that'd be like an extra 100, 120 watts or so from your car while you're driving. So that's really amazing to have dual inputs on this unit here. So now in this test, I drained this battery from 100% all the way to 0% to see what kind of capacity I could get out of it. I powered a 60-inch TV and also a heated blanket, and it was using anywhere between 100 to 300 watts, depending on how the blanket cycled, down to 40%. And then I used a sweeper, swept around, powered a coffee pot and a few other things for the last 40%, and I got 1,680 watt hours out of it, and it took just about 9 hours to drain this down with the load that I was using. So that's about 82% efficiency out of that battery with the load that I was drawing on it. Now you might get a little bit more if you were drawing a higher load. Like I said, a lot of the times I was only drawing 100 to 110 watts when I was powering just the TV. Now in this test, we're going to charge this from AC power, and we're going to see how fast this unit will charge up from 0%, and we're going to see what the max input we can get, because it's supposed to charge up to 1800 watts off of AC power. Now you can get this unit to charge faster if you had it plugged in to AC and solar panels at the same time. It will go over 1800 watts as I showed in the test previously, but this is going to be just with AC to see what you can expect if you were trying to charge this as fast as possible from AC. And I'm really surprised that at 1% it's already pulling in 1,110 watts, only 2.5 minutes into it. A lot of power stations will charge up slowly until they hit like 10 or 20%, and then it will ramp up, and I'm already getting a pretty good input right from the get-go on this. So that's pretty impressive. All right, so just over 5 minutes in, and at 4%, it's already pulling in almost 1,700 watts. That's insane. All right, so we just hit 1 hour, and we're at 68%, it's taking in 1696 watts, and it shows that it has 26 minutes now left to charge. So the max that I've seen this hit was 1696. I have not seen it hit 1800 watts yet, so I'm not sure why they're saying it charges at 1800. But still really fast charging so far up to this point. All right, so we just reached 100%. It took 1 hour and 40 minutes. Now, according to Ecoflow, it says that you could charge this thing up to 80% in 43 minutes if you use both solar input and AC, with 1800 watts of AC input and 600 watts of solar input for a max input of 2400 watts. However, the max I was able to see on the input charging with AC was 1696 watts. Now, just charging from AC alone without any solar input, it took me 70 minutes to reach the 80% mark. But this thing will charge super fast if you have it plugged in from AC and solar, but with just AC, about an hour and 40 minutes total. All right, so as you can see, this thing handled everything that I threw at it, from the pressure washer that was using about 1600 watts, but at one point peaked at like 2400. It ran over 2400 watts for a minute before it threw the overload, and it ran 2400 watts consistently. So this thing should run any appliance up to 20 amp, any normal appliance that you would plug into any normal house outlet, this thing should run. So thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you found this video enjoyable, helpful, and if you're interested in picking one up, like I said before, please check out the link in the description. Thanks for watching, everyone. Oh, and consider subscribing, and I will see you all around on the next one. I got a lot of exciting things coming up.